Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Kirklees Council's Children's Scrutiny panel on Thursday, the 2nd of July at 10 a.m. Really warm welcome to everybody who is attending the meeting and joining in or watching this at a later date. Just going to do a quick round of introductions for panel members, and during the meeting, officers who are making presentations will introduce themselves then, and any other councillors who are asking questions on a particular item will introduce themselves then. So I'm Andrew Marchington, Kirklees councillor, and I'm chair of the Children's Scrutiny panel. Paul Davis, do you want to introduce yourself, please? Do you want to unmute, Paul?
Good if I turn my mute off.
That's fine.
Yep. Good start. Yeah, Paul Davis, Kirklees councillor and panel member.
Right. Richard Smith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Richard Smith, Kirkburton Ward councillor and panel member.
Thank you. Paul White.
Hi, Paul White, Kirklees councillor, Colne Valley North Ward.
Thank you. Tony.
Tony Bromley, volunteer co-optee.
Thank you. Dale.
Volunteer co-optee.
Thank you, Dale. Linda.
Linda Summers, statutory co-optee.
Thank you. And I've received apologies from Amanda Pinnock, who's got work commitments this morning. Lee, have we had any other apologies?
No other apologies, Chair. No, that's it.
That's lovely. Thank you. Members of the panel, have you got any interest to declare on any items on the agenda? You just raise your hand. That's fine. Thank you. If we look on to item 3, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. That was held on the 13th of March 2020, seems like a long while ago. Are we okay to approve those as a correct record? I mean, if you do a visual acknowledgement, are we okay to approve those the minutes of that meeting?
Yes.
Let's do that. That's fine, thank you.
Yep.
Are there any matters arising from those minutes that won't be covered during the ordinary agenda? That doesn't like that. So those meetings are approved and adopted, thank you. Item 4, all of our meetings are held in public unless there's reason not to do so. On today's agenda, we're getting an update on the improvement journey, and there might be some of those items which are not ready to be for public publication at the moment. So if necessary, when it gets to item 13, we'll finish our meeting then, and there might be other items to discuss, but we'll discuss as much of it in public as we can do at item 12. Thank you. Lee, have we received any deputations or petitions for this meeting?
No deputations or petitions, no.
Thank you. And have any members of the public asked to ask questions?
No, no public questions.
Thank you. I think Councillor Munro's here to ask questions. Alison, is it about Almonbury Community School you've got a question to ask or comments?
Sorry, I just mute myself. Yes, it is. It's on item 9, Andrew.
Right, I'll bring you in at that stage on the agenda, Alison, if that's...
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Right. We're on to item 7. We're in into the 15th week of lockdown. Things might be changing over the weekend, but it's still... And one of the things we want to look at is the impact of lockdown and what has been done on young people in Kirklees, and particularly what has been done to keep vulnerable children safe. So I'm going to bring Elaine McShane in now to introduce this item. Thank you, Elaine. If you want to put your video on and unmute.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's well this morning. So I'm going to be reading a report just so I can ensure that I give as good a picture as possible. So one of the things I'd been asked to talk about is our number of children looked after. That actually, I would say over the recent weeks we had a slight increase at the onset of COVID and some midway through, but the number of looked after children has appeared to have settled around, in May it was 677. What I can say, and this has meant myself and Tom Brailsford working really closely together, that because of probably some of our older young people and their resistance to actually adhering to COVID restrictions, we had a number of placement breakdowns, so we've had to work really closely together to ensure that they find suitable alternative placements and actually are continue to adhere to what is expected of them. In terms of our children looked after, which I'll focus on, is they have continued to have statutory visits undertaken. Some of those, at the onset of this, we did a risk assessment on actually every open case. We had close to 2,700 cases open at the start of COVID, and each of those children had an individual risk assessment. Some of that was around the attendance in education, because as you'll be aware, the government expected that every child that had a social worker or an EHCP plan was attending education. And what we did, we worked closely with our foster carers and children's homes to undertake a risk, and schools to undertake a risk assessment around, the benefits of child being in school or remaining in the home setting. Could we provide a robust education provision within the home setting? And that has worked really well. At the outset, we had, I think, as low as 5% of vulnerable children in education. Most recently, that's been just over 20%, and actually that is well above the national average. So the work that we've done ongoing has been really positive in terms of encouraging children back into school. What we've also introduced, you'll see in the report, is Keep in Touch Coordinator for Children in Care. So that is somebody independent of the social worker actually getting in touch with our young people just to check their well-being and provide some advocacy. And we've seen that that's worked very well. Our children's statutory reviews have continued to take place. And again, I think what we've seen in this, and again with child protection conferences, is actually children actually feel more confident in presenting virtually than they would than actually being physically in a meeting. So we're taking some learning from that. We've seen that as a real positive for our children in care. I think, Tom, did you say you wanted to talk about the children's residential homes?
Yeah, Elaine, thank you. Tom Brailsford, Service Director for Resources Improvement and Partnerships. And I'll just pick up on our residential settings and also our foster care provision. So as part of throughout COVID, our children's homes have obviously been open and operating as normally as possible. What we've done with each setting is to undertake a clear risk assessment in conjunction with public health and infection control. I think it's fair to say that sometimes due to some behaviours that have been experienced, that it has been difficult to carry on as normally as we would possibly. So sometimes we've had to introduce the use of PPE, and sometimes what we've had to do is limit the amount of people who've been coming into residential homes in terms of the normal professionals who might have been coming in. I think also just picking up on Elaine's point about sufficiency and some of the early placement breakdowns, what we've also had to do is look for extra capacity within our children's homes setting. So what we did was we used to have Crescentdale as one of our children's homes, and it had previously gone back to adults, but we temporarily took Crescentdale back and registered that setting in a new statement of purpose as a temporary children's homes with Ofsted, and have been working very closely with Ofsted around that. The other thing I think it's worth panel members noting is that due to the risk of infection control, that we took the decision to temporarily suspend respite services at Orchard View and the young persons activity team. So those provisions have been suspended and are still suspended, but we put a redesigned offer in place, which means that children and young people have still been having services. We've been utilising Kirklees active leisure staff, utilising some of our other staff to make sure that children are taken out and there is some respite in place. And again, there's been individual risk assessments undertaken with families in terms of their risk of breakdown and what we can do to prevent that. It's also worth saying that due to Orchard View being suspended, we have used Orchard View as a temporary children's home as well in terms of its mainstream provision. So we've talked to Ofsted and registered a variation to the statement of purpose for Orchard View as well. And finally, just to say, in terms of the foster care input, obviously, again, that's been going on as normally as possible, but we've increased the amount of support to foster carers. We've been meeting with Kirklees Fostering Network on a weekly basis, and we've done a number of things in terms of ensuring that there's more support. So we've developed a lot of bespoke advice and support for foster carers. We've made sure the emotional health and wellbeing clinic is accessible virtually for foster carers. We've also looked at our payment structures. So we've put emergency payments in for foster carers, and also payments in place where foster carers may take an extra placement. And we've also looked at developing, we're in the process of developing an out-of-hours support service for foster carers to reduce the risk of family breakdown. And finally, one of the other things we've done, as you'll know, the government allowed some easements, and what we've done is taken advantage of some of the easements in terms of foster care recruitment. So we've utilised Regulation 24 to be able to recruit foster carers in a quicker way, which has meant that we've had a lot of volunteers for emergency foster carers, and I think we've recruited 9 from educational settings at the moment, and we continue to take advantage of those easements while making sure that risk isn't compromised. And I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Marchington,
yes.
Would you like me to talk about the broader workforce, or do that at the later point?
I think if we're going to, I'll see if there's any questions or comments at the moment on our looked after and vulnerable children lane, and then we'll move it into the broader. So, panel members, have got any questions or comments particularly about looked after? If you want to either raise your hand visually or you, sorry, Paul Davis. Bring you in.
Yep, and I've remembered to unmute myself this time.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul.
That's okay.
Right.
Just a question on respite. I know I noticed in the report, when I read the report, that the efforts have been made on this. What's your assessment, Tom, in terms of the impact? Are we still managing to provide a good services in this area? Are there still areas that you're concerned about?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Yeah, I think we are still managing to provide a flexible service. What we're actually doing is in the process, we, as you might have known, that we've had some staff redeployment from Ofsted, and we've had some Ofsted inspectors working with us, and we've currently got one of the inspectors talking to all the families who are accessing respite support to kind of summarise what's been good about it, what they'd like in the future. And I think things like making sure people can utilise direct payments and personal budgets in a clearer, more flexible way has come up. I think there's clearly still a need for overnight respite care, and I don't think that will diminish. And I think there's something about how we provide that as creatively as possible. I think the utilisation of the CAL staff has been fantastic in terms of their skill set and the outdoors type stuff, and I think people have and children and families have really responded to that. I think there's obviously going to be an ongoing worry where children and families have got children and young people who've got additional needs, and it's been pressurised in lockdown. And I think the more we can do to make sure that we get our as normal as possible respite service up and running will be really important. But we've got to look at that in terms of, the concept of bubbles and how we do that with bubbles of children and young people. But I would say I've been pleasantly surprised in terms of how well that respite's been received.
Just a quick comment,
if
that's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. That's very reassuring. I think the other thing which also I think is very interesting and reassuring is that we are learning from what we're doing, and I think that's a theme throughout this. And it's great to see that we've used some new solutions, some different approaches, and they are working. So that's certainly something we could keep doing and should keep going in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Linda, can I bring you in? Question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Right.
I have a question for Elaine, if I may, in relation to the arrangements generally for looked after children, and she talks about some very positive stuff. I have to say that with another hat on and in another context, I have picked up significant concerns from the education sector about the additional load that is falling onto school staff, safeguarding leads, teachers and pastoral support staff, to provide additional support who are not for looked after children who are not getting the support that they are used to from social workers. In fact, I got an email yesterday about this that talked about school staff actually being asked by social services to take the lead in supporting looked after children. And then the email goes on to describe how that's actually working in practice, which is permanent availability on a mobile phone 24/7, weekdays and weekends, and in non-term time to provide emotional support when required to pupils and students. Now, these staff, obviously, they want to support these children, of course they do, but they are massively stretched in relation to their own responsibilities at the moment. And I just wonder how sustainable this arrangement is going to be, and when Elaine thinks it might be possible to restore a bit more of a balance in those arrangements.
Thank you. I have to say, actually, what you're describing is not my expectation. I'd be really interested as well in Joanne Sanders' comment on this, because Joanne and myself have worked really closely with the schools about our expectations. What I've had along all through the last weeks is social workers have been in work. We've had them on a rota basis. They have been going out visiting children. We've done a risk assessment. We've worked closely with schools. Certainly, very early on, I was challenged by the schools in terms of my expectations that children, well, not my expectations, the government expectation that children were in school, and we worked very closely on our risk assessments to take into account what the schools were saying. So I am a little bit surprised by what you're saying, because I've not had any of that feedback from the schools personally, and if I had, I would have addressed that, and I certainly would have talked to Joanne about it, because Joanne has regular meetings with the schools, and it's not something that's come back. And certainly it's not my expectation, because the statutory responsibility for a looked after child is the social worker, and we wouldn't be asking a school to take on that responsibility. So if you share that information with me, I will pick it up as directly
if you can
after
do that,
this
Linda.
meeting.
Yes, I will.
Yeah,
do.
if you
Please.
can do that, that'd be
Thank
really
you,
useful.
Linda.
Thank you.
Joanne, do you want to make? Is there anything you want to add to that, or?
Thank you. It's Joanne Sanders. I'm Service Director for Learning and Early Support. I think there is a report actually next on the agenda when I will talk about sort of the challenges around education, but I would concur. We've been working alongside our schools and educational settings. I think it's been an incredibly challenging time for all of us. Particularly our school staff, when a lot of the systems and processes that are in place when youngsters are fully attending schools, colleges, early learning settings have not been the norm over the last 14, 15 weeks. We've had to be as creative as we possibly can be, and I suspect that there are lessons to be learned, and like Elena said, really welcome understanding what some of the challenges are, but I think we have been working really collaboratively between social care and education to make sure that the best arrangements that where youngsters are safe and well looked after have been put in place.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, just on this side, but I think again the slight increase in the number of looked after children was picked up. I know the Children's Improvement Board's been meeting throughout lockdown measures in place, but given it's still well below some of the historical highs we've had of looked after children, I think the steps were taken quite quickly to check if there's a trend. And I think it's a testament to the hard work that is being done that families have been supported as well as possible, and there hasn't been a much higher increase in the number of looked after children at this stage. So I think just to say thank you for those who both in social work, children's social work, and members of staff in schools who have been taking so much care of the children that they look after on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's appreciated. Right, Elaine, do you want to move into onto the wider impact, please?
Yeah, just bear with me one moment. So yeah, this in terms of the wider children's workforce, and this includes our children's looked after services as well. Very early on, we determined that our approach would be to remain within our statutory requirements wherever possible, and align ourselves to the government's principles around child-centred practice by promoting children's best interest, about a risk-based approach to prioritising support and resources for children at greatest risk, but actually not losing sight, I think, of some of those children and young people that sit under our radar that are not necessarily known to children's social work. And I've worked closely with the Safeguarding Partnership to ensure that we don't lose sight of that very vulnerable group. Being family focused, harnessing strength in families and actually communities. And I have to say, the work that's been done in the communities, I think for our families, has been so vital to the support they've received during this period, and that's a real positive, and I think things that we can learn from and things we'd want to take forward. And I think, as Joanne said, all the work we've done has been collaborative. It is about working in partnership with parents and other professionals and being transparent and providing clarity around what we're doing in the child's best interest to promote their well-being. So as I said, we had a range of measures because we have had social workers in practice, so going out doing face-to-face contacts. We are doing virtual contacts, but we know we have had to see children face-to-face to ensure their well-being, and it's that balance of actually the child's welfare but while safeguarding our social work practitioners as well. We have had team managers and service managers and heads of service as well, maintaining visible leadership. So actually the social workers feel confident and have reassurance. I think what I would say, I've set out in a report the different aspects that we've taken in different services, but at the outset, in terms of our front door service, we did base all our social work practitioners at home, but actually what we saw very quickly is that actually their decision making was not as robust as it might be, and we think what we saw is that they were missing that ongoing support on a day-to-day basis of their team managers, who can often tap into the work that they're doing. So we've gradually reintroduced them back into the workplace so they've got that ongoing support. I think we've linked very closely with our early support colleagues, ensuring that we work seamlessly to support our families. I think in terms of some of the work we've done, it's been said that we are taking learning. Some of the virtual work that we've done has been seen to be very positive. So if you think about our child protection case conferences that have been very positive for this period of time, but now what we're looking forward to is the next phase, and actually how will we undertake conferences that can include families and professionals at the same time that are not necessarily virtual. So lots of activity, but what I would say first and foremost, placing children at the centre of what we do. We had to do that with family time. So at the onset, actually, we made the decision that we wouldn't provide face-to-face contact, that all that would be done virtually. Again, some children and young people have responded very positively to that, but we recognise for others that is not in their best interest. So we move into a next phase of promoting some outdoor contact with their families. In terms of what I would say, in terms of our young people at risk of extrafamilial safeguarding, so where they're potential to be safeguarded, we've had a specific strategy in place to identify and monitor those young people to minimise any risk they may face during this really unprecedented time. So actually, I'm welcome to take any questions on that at this point.
Sorry, Richard, did you have a question on this? Did you have a question? No, fine. Right,
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep going on mute, so I don't disturb. No, I've just lowered my hand. I'm going to wait, please. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay. So, Paul Davis.
Yep. Thanks, Elaine. It's just around the approach that they've taken in terms of the social workers, both, you know, if you like, the blended approach, I guess at the moment, working in some working in the office, some working at home. I'm just interested in your thoughts really about this issue of decision making. You know, you made reference to perhaps a lower quality of decision making when social workers are working from home. What concerns are there around that? Because I would imagine if we've got inexperienced social workers, I can understand that, but with experienced social workers, was that still an issue? Because if that is an issue, then you know, that may be something we need to review going forward, because to be dependent on the team manager is obviously a bottleneck and a problem. You're on mute, Elaine. You've done my trick.
I know. That's the constant word through these meetings, and you're on mute. I do apologise.
Okay.
So thank you, Councillor Davis. So yeah, we're actually currently on our next phase of looking at our workforce and how we introduce more people back into the office, because the very nature of social work is actually that you work alongside other individuals, so less experienced alongside more senior practitioners, and you're learning and you're listening to conversations in the office. We have to do that in a socially distanced way and be mindful of infection control, and we will be working in bubbles, so we're just setting that out. I think what I could confidently say that over this period we have managed to see families to ensure that children are safeguarded, but can I confidently say that we actually have moved plans forward in the way that we would want to see and make progress with families. And the very nature of our work is about the relationships with families that you can't necessarily develop over this virtual approach. So what we've had an advantage of is that we've known some of our families very well, the cases that were open to us. So we've been able to harness that, but actually it's where new families have come in. Yes, we're going out to do visits, but actually you're not building the relationships in the same way. So that's why we feel, you're right, we need to bring social workers back into a workplace where they're having interaction with each other, learning from each other, sharing information, and actually then going out to see our families and building back up the relationships, what we're not seeing in the way that we would like. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yeah. Yes, it does. and absolutely, I agree. I think the point I guess I'm raising as well is in terms of empowerment of social workers and ability to make decisions as a social worker, that I guess from my perspective, I'd be a little bit concerned if it was the case that, and I'm not saying this is happening, if it was the case that the team manager had to be involved in that decision-making process on a day-to-day basis. As I say, I'm not saying that's happening, but I'm just trying to get a handle on that balance, Elaine.
Yeah. No, you're right, Councillor Davis, because what happens actually with social workers, they get an increasing autonomy as they progress through their career. So you have an ASYE that has a great deal of input, and our advanced practitioners provide a lot of support to our newly qualified social workers. And as you progress through different social workers, and you become when you're a senior practitioner in social work, it is determined that you have an high level of actually autonomy in your decision making. However, we have to be mindful as well that we're working in unprecedented times. There are other challenges in this period that have been very different to what we've worked with before. So it's ensuring that we have, and it's something about just checking with that social worker that's going out to do a visit that they're feeling okay, confident about that, and when they return, has that gone well? It's not necessarily about influencing the decision making, it's that wraparound support that maintains that confidence in that social worker as a practitioner.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks, Elaine. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
That's fine. Any other questions or comments from members of the panel about that? Just go a quick run around. Paul White, you want to anything at this stage? Richard? Linda? No. Tony? Dale, is there anything you want to ask at this moment? No, that's fine. Right, thank you very much for those reports and those presentations, and thank you for your questions. I think we'll now move on to item 8, which is the update on wider opening of schools and the planning for the next academic year. One of the things we discussed about modifying our work programme was having a particular look at educational outcomes over the longer term. And obviously with the current pandemic and lockdown, that's had massive impact, long-term impact on children's education. So I think it's appropriate for us to look at that impact at the moment, how we might look at what's happening in the future, and actually planning our role in Scrutiny at looking at making sure we get the best outcomes for children and young people as we go ahead. So Joanne, you want to talk to your report?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. As I said earlier, Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support. I'll just take you through the report that we've provided. What we've tried to do is, I suppose, explain what's happened since the 20th of March, really, in terms of the requirements on our schools and education settings, what that has looked like in terms of our approach in Kirklees, and the way in which we've been working in partnership, and that's very much about outcomes for the whole child, obviously their educational attainment, but also it's been about keeping confidence, keeping those youngsters safe and well looked after. So on the 20th of March, obviously it was announced that we were going to go into a lockdown, and that schools will be closed to all youngsters other than those who are children of key workers and those classed as vulnerable. And I've given you the government definition of what they meant by that. Actually, what was quite helpful as well is that obviously schools and settings working in partnership with colleagues in early support and in social care know those youngsters who might not fit a particular category or characteristic but may be at risk of being vulnerable, and they were able to schools were able to use their discretion to make the offer of a school place. I think Elaine touched upon our pattern of attendance, and appreciate in the main body of the report, the diagram's quite small, and I think I've put that as an appendix so you can have a look at that in a bit more detail. You can see that, and you've got to bear in mind, I suppose, some of the natural rhythm of the school holidays. For the first few days, attendance was low. It was around 3% of youngsters being in attendance at school, but bearing in mind as well that we were working towards an Easter holiday period. That said, because we'd had so much engagement and dialogue, and we were all finding our feet around government guidance, what we saw was a real collaboration about undertaking risk assessments and encouraging and having conversations with families about enabling those youngsters who were classed as vulnerable and those youngsters who needed to attend a setting to enable their parents or carers to attend work, so that they could feel confident around attending either their setting or an alternative setting. But that I mean, there was a significant amount of work was undertaken around risk assessing each individual circumstance, and it was very much about even if youngsters were not in attendance, that does not mean to say that schools and education settings were not looking after their youngsters in terms of welfare checks. In some instances, our school staff were making socially distanced visits to the home, and so even though physically might not have been present, that doesn't mean to say that engagement wasn't being undertaken. What you can see from the chart is obviously over time that our schools then were enabled to open for wider year groups, that attendance has increased. And as our week commencing the 22nd, which is the fitted in with the time of writing the report, all our settings were open. Our school settings were open to youngsters, but we very much supported them being able to do so when they were able to do so, recognising that each school is different. I've given you some background on in terms of how this has played out. On the 11th of May, there was a government intention that schools could open from the 1st of June, but obviously there was conditions attached to that in relation to 5 tests being met. I've outlined the 5 tests that were declared by the government. And there's been throughout this period of time, since very early on in the lockdown, a significant number of guidance that was issued to support schools, local authorities, colleges, early year settings, to be able to implement the appropriate measures, to create the circumstances, to give the technical advice and support to enable settings to be able to work with their staff and youngsters. So I've pointed you towards the guidance that was the latest guidance at the time. But I think what I'd want you to scrutiny to get a sense of, if you didn't have already, was the sort of fast pace of the guidance being issued and then having to be implemented. This has been days, not weeks. Some of the planning for some of these circumstances might have taken months in any previous circumstance, but actually it's really required the education system, national and local government to, I suppose, both challenge and support each other in equal measures so that we're doing and creating the right circumstances for a safe return. So we were anticipating that wider opening with a particular emphasis on primary schools for the 1st of June, and it was the 24th of May when a government announcement was made to say that the 5 tests in their view have been met, but what we'd been saying to our schools and settings very much was about we will support you to get the arrangements in place, and maybe for you, for your school, the 1st of June will not be the right date. It might be the 2nd of June, it might be the 8th of June, but like I said, each school is different, the different sizes of schools, phases of schools, and it was about being able to work alongside schools and governors, academy trusts, to make sure that we've taken into account their particular circumstances. So just wanted to move on to section 2. I suppose I've touched a little bit on it, but what did we do then? What did we practically do as we went into this situation? What we did very early on was establish very regular engagement with a representative group of head teachers who sit on our Education Learning Partnership Board. Very early on, we were talking to that group of heads daily. We've now reverted to twice weekly. It's been absolutely crucial in being able to get the feedback from our schools and settings, whether it's around things such as PPE availability, cleaning, school meal vouchers, all of the sort of practical challenges and opportunities so that we could respond appropriately. We've been meeting with our chief executive officers of any schools that are part of a multi-academy trust, and we've been doing that weekly. And we've had the opportunity to have regular engagement from the Department for Education. Again, very early on in this pandemic situation, it was daily, but we've sustained that now twice weekly. We've also put an awful lot of our staff expertise and directed that towards supporting our schools. So each school in Kirklees has a Kirklees learning partner, and they've been engaging on a one-to-one basis with the schools that they are assigned to listen to particular challenges, to offer advice, support and guidance. As Scrutiny will know, we have our schools work together in community hubs, and what we did again very early on was to put in place arrangements for some strategic planning, so we could do that collaboration at a more localized level, and we also put in a specific hub because our special schools have got some particular characteristics as they serve youngsters across the district. Working with our professional associations and trade union colleagues have been absolutely crucial. As part of this, they have been again challenging and supporting to enable us as a system to get the best possible circumstances for the safe environment in our schools. And what we did, we put in place a dedicated telephone line and email address so that if head teachers, if school colleagues had questions, they could be funneled in to one place, because we were clear that I think if one person had a question, it might apply to all 190 school settings. And it was about being able to get frequently asked questions answered, whether that be about staff, health and safety, curriculum, learning, IT devices, in a very regular way. We've been using our electronic communication system, which is called Heads Up, and we've been providing a significant amount of advice, guidance, whether it's been about attendance, catering, cleaning, infection prevention, control, to name but a few, just to get that clarity for schools where they've needed it. And we've been able to liaise and contribute to both regional and national strategic groups via the directors of children's services, of which we participate with our director, Mel Meggs. So it's been, I cannot stress how important that's been, so that we can be responsive on a range of issues, and actually being able to feed back some things that have been particularly challenging back to the Department for Education, which we hope and we believe has influenced and shaped the next steps. So obviously we had the 1st of June, which was when our government would have liked schools to have been open for a wider group of youngsters, and what we wanted to do really was use our existing education Learning Partnership Board, which is chaired by our portfolio holder, Councillor Carol Patterson, and we really wanted to focus on a robust planning process. And like I say, it was less fixated on a date, but much more about getting the circumstances right. And we came, as a partnership, we came up with 3 principles to underpin the work, which I outlined there in the report on page 29. And so what we did do, we established 4 working groups that have been meeting every single week since the 18th of May. And you can see how we sort of divided up some of the areas of work, whether that be about the mental and physical well-being of youngsters, school staff, or whether it be about anything to do with the physical environment, right through to the bits that you were pointing out, Chair, around the learning opportunities and the challenges that this situation has presented. We've put in place some regular engagement with our parents, and we've issued letters via our school system system to try and explain to parents what we've been trying to do, and we've been pleased to have some feedback from some parents telling us about the challenges and the benefits for them and their youngsters. We also held on the 22nd of May a schools webinar where we were able to have a panel of local experts, I suppose, obviously our Director of Public Health, our Infection Prevention Control nurses and others who could answer schools' questions directly, and that opportunity to engage with all of our schools has proved to be quite a vital touch point at that time, just before that 1st of June, as people were still putting their final planning in place. Moving on then, obviously we're now got very much one eye on the rest of, not only the rest of this term, but also thinking now into September. And as we've been sat in the scrutiny meeting this morning, the government have published their guidance, which will support schools and settings with being able to undertake some of that thinking in time for September, when the ambition is that all youngsters return to education. We need, obviously, collectively, need to have some time to reflect upon that and be able to respond quite quickly. Contextually, we've got 2 weeks left of the academic year, and so significant amount of work that we need to process and respond to, and I think the strength will be that we have been working in this partnership way, and that what will serve as well, but we need to understand that. Focusing then, if we focus on educational outcomes, the government have made some announcements, of which we asked, there's detail is starting to emerge around catch-up packages, which is believed that is intended to target the lost teaching time that youngsters may have undertaken, and as well as a national tutoring programme. And what we're trying to understand is what does that mean at a school level? What does that mean at an authority level? And what opportunities do we have to be able to get youngsters back into school, into education, and have their needs met? We obviously need, as collectively as a system, some time to understand that detail, and I'm sure that will emerge over the coming weeks. What we did do just yesterday, the Education and Learning Partnership Board met yesterday and discussed a couple of matters. We are very much keen to have a real focus on our priorities for education, certainly for the next academic year, but thinking a little bit beyond that. And we hope to be able to agree some shared priorities before the end of this academic year, so we're able to do our planning around that from September. And we also were having a discussion about how we might collectively welcome back youngsters and staff and families back into what will be our new normal from September, and we should be in a position to be able to update colleagues before the end of term. So I will now happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments? Yeah.
But that is an overview, I suppose, of the last 15 weeks, is it?
Thank you. Very comprehensive review. Thank you, John. Questions or comments from panel members? Richard, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you. Yes. Hello. Good morning, John. I'm probably going to use a phrase I don't like using, which is "we are where we are." So what we've had over the last 50 weeks is what we've had. I'm not particularly going to make a comment about what we've lost, because it's quite clear we've lost a lot of time for kids in schools. What I'm more interested in is how we're going to make up the difference, and I fully appreciate that this is not all in the gift of the local authority. Some of this is down to government, and some of it is down to individual schools. So this is not me trying to pressurise the authority into fixing everything, because it's not in your gift to fix everything. So this morning, the government has announced there's a full return to the classroom 5 days a week from September for all kids. So the first point is, I would anticipate that Kirklees will need to do something to support schools to achieve this. There are still schools at the moment that are not opening to anyone except a very small handful of kids. That's too late to change, because we've got 2 weeks left before we go into school holidays. But I suspect those schools are the ones that are either challenged by their layouts or some reason or other that they find it more difficult than others to welcome back the kids that have already gone back in other schools for whatever reason. But those are the schools who may need more support to enable all children to go back in September. So that's the only real question, really. I know I went about it in a long-winded way. I've got one more, and that is, you mentioned lost teaching time, and the fact that we've got 2 weeks left before kids go away for summer holidays. I mean, it might not be possible, but my background, I talk about things like gap analysis. So what I mean by that in this context is where the kids should be at this point in time. So there's usually a period of, sorry, I'll rephrase it. There will be a understanding amongst the teaching profession of where a child should be at the end of the academic year, and the gap between where they should be and where they are, given that we've missed 3 months of school. Is there a way that somebody could provide this gap analysis in order to inform parents what they've missed and allow them to do a bit of work over the summer holidays to try and catch up, if that makes sense?
Right. So a couple of questions that would, I'll tell you what, if I've got one about the reopening, the possibility of reopening, in particular around the limitations of some of our schools, and then about gap analysis of educational attainment. I think I'll take a couple of questions because I've got Paul White and Paul Davis indicating to speak. Have you got any other questions about along those lines, and then Joanne could answer them about school reopening, or no? That's fine. Okay, John. So small schools or limitations for opening 1st of September,
So,
and then a bit about gap analysis for.
So yeah, absolutely. Or I think it's not just about the physical attributes of a school building. It's about the size of the school. It's about the characteristics of a school, and actually sometimes it's about the I suppose the demand. So at this moment in time, there's still a priority for those youngsters of key workers and vulnerable families. And it may well be, and I know this to be fact for at least a couple of our schools, that in terms of what they can physically manage under the government guidance has been a school that's been at full capacity under the COVID regulations with children of families that are key workers or vulnerable, which has been really difficult. But I do think I know talking to our schools, they've been trying to be as creative as they possibly can to have that contact, engagement, plans in place to try and do something with everybody by the, in varying degrees by the end of this term. Absolutely, we'll want to and have been supporting schools around their physical environment. I think I tried to outline some of the depth in terms of the way in which we've been working. Obviously, I've not had time to, and neither will my colleagues have had time to digest the information, but some of the questions I think were already coming and are well understood by us. I think it's, having had a quick look at the guidance, it's about what schools aren't expected to do as much as what they are expected to do, and I think that looks like a real emphasis on good hygiene and being able to deal with infection and prevention control. So I feel quite optimistic that we're well poised to support all our schools for September, but we need some time to work that through. In terms of gap analysis, it's an interest, absolutely. We need, part of the reason why we need youngsters back in school is so that teachers can understand where they are, and it's by far being able to undertake that quality first teaching that will support youngsters. I hasten to use the word catch up, but that is, I suppose, what's out there, catch up with what they've missed. And I think what we've got to make sure is that the circumstances are right for youngsters to learn. You're right, they've lost some of that structure with not attending school, but and it's about how we be able to work with our schools to find the best possible approaches, interventions that are evidence-based to be able to give a good educational offer. And we will be able to do some of that analysis, but bearing in mind that the way in which youngsters have been assessed this time is very different to in previous years with no formal exams or tests. So absolutely, that's where we can work across the system, and that would be our intention in the autumn term.
Thank you, John. Paul White, question.
Thanks, Chair. Questions. I'm another one with different hats and different situations. So I'm also a chair of a school governors, so I've been heavily involved with the wider opening of the school. I'm preparing for next term without the guidance, really, because I think it's been fairly obvious what the guidance is probably going to say. But I think two areas that I was really interested in was the catch-up package, and you've sort of alluded to that. I think probably we don't really know enough about it, really, to make an awful lot of comment. So I was hoping to get some sort of help in terms of how that might work in practice, but you might know more than I know. So if that's the case, that's fine. But in particular, when we were looking at the wider opening, one of our real concerns was the test, track and trace programme for the UK and how advanced and how successful that was going to be, because it was pretty obvious that for wider opening of schools, unless we had test, track and trace working effectively, we were going to have big issues potentially in schools. So my question is really about how you feel that is working. I've got some evidence that it seems to be not working that well in school, in that tests for individuals, staff, have been taking 4 or 5 days to come back, and that creates quite a lot of anxiety in a school for obvious reasons. And then I was thinking about, or looking at what you know about the mobile testing units and how quick they're able to react to schools, because I think that is absolutely essential. I mean, my wife is a chair of an academy trust, and they've had a very big incident in one of her schools, and it's not in Kirklees, but it's why I'm really interested as to how we can react very quickly to look at these sort of outbreaks or individual cases in schools.
Joanne.
Okay, in terms of catch up, I just maybe it's an opportunity to be really clear. I don't think I don't know if it's people think that this has been such a fast-moving situation. We're not getting any earlier information than the rest of the system in terms of any of the government announcements, because that's had to be by its nature very responsive. What we did do yesterday at the Education Learning Partnership Board is one of our senior learning partners gave a presentation about the detail that we do know, which is quite limited at this moment in time in terms of the catch-up funding. There's there's a head teacher briefing for primary schools later this week where what we do know will be shared. And one of the things that it was felt would be helpful would be for the local authority to be able to be poised to pull out some of that detail and share it readily. Bearing in mind, and I'm sure you know this, Councillor White, being a chair of governors at our schools, have been inundated with guidance about and having to respond really quickly. It's easy to it's easy not to have the opportunity to get into some of the details. So we will sit alongside our schools to be able for them to understand what that means financially, what that means practically, and where there is quality resource. And I have some confidence because it's the Education Endowment Fund and Sutton Trust that are very much working around some of that guidance, and it's evidence led. In terms of questions around test, track and trace, mobile tested units, I'm afraid I am not our Director of Public Health. It's not. I'm not wishing to. So I can't give you. I can give you the detail that I can give you. In terms of. Like any new system, these things take time to embed. I do think in terms of the systems and that we've got locally, in terms of supporting our schools with either suspected or confirmed cases, I think we are well poised to get the support into schools so that we can act accordingly. And I think that's been highly valued by our schools, and we've given clear flowcharts and guidance so that we can respond proportionately, appropriately, and that will continue to strengthen, I have no doubt.
Perhaps we can follow up some of those concerns with the Director of Public Health, Rachel Spentential. We'll pick that question up outside the meeting then, Paul, if that's okay. About track and trace and follow that through, because that is quite important. Okay, Tony, I'll bring you in at this stage. Question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if there's going to be separate risk assessments for Black and minority ethnic children on returning to school, given the increased risk to them and their families with the virus.
Okay, in terms of, I'm not sure about children. Certainly, staff. There is and has been the opportunity for particular groups of staff, whether they're shielded or Black and ethnic minority. So it's been very much. There's a wider risk assessments, but risk assessments for particular groups that are more vulnerable, and that would include, for example, youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities. But that's a point I'll take away and clarify around the children of youngsters BAME.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Tony. Paul Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Well, first, just a comment, Joanne, just huge thanks to you and your team, and of course all the teams within the schools. I think you've already explained, I think in quite a bit of detail, the pressures and the difficulties, and I think it's been quite amazing, the reaction. I think both from the LA and, as I say, from the individual schools. And I've like Paul, Councillor White, I'm a governor, and I've seen that at the school as well. Two points I wanted to pick up, just to explain, I am a member of the Education Learning Partnership Board. I've taken part in the working group, so I'm reflecting some of those discussions. But one is, again, COVID-19, what we're going through, what we've been through and are going through is to say the least, pretty awful. But there are opportunities for learning, and again, I'd be very interested, John, in your view on how are we going to pick up those lessons? How are we going to look at possibly different ways of delivering education, more effective ways, and more inclusive ways going forward? And then secondly, which is linked to that as well, I think, is the issue of digital poverty. And again, it's been very stark through this pandemic. The impact that has had on our children who have not got access to either the technology or to the internet itself. So again, could you outline what we're doing within the LA and our thoughts and processes around that going forward? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Davis. I think just going back to yesterday's partnership board, what we were trying to have a discussion about was not only the challenges, but also opportunities, new ways of working. And I think we were talking very much about the sort of creativity that we've seen. I mean, our schools, our schools and education settings, our early years settings, our colleges, the local university. I think it's been absolutely well, I feel very privileged actually to work in Kirklees. I'm sure that's been happening up and down the country. What I can talk about is Kirklees in terms of the sort of creativity, the passion, that's been there really to continue to support in the most challenging of circumstances. And actually it's brought out a lot of innovation. For example, being able, I mean, the fact that we're holding a meeting in this way, and I know that there have been lessons, learning, all sorts of opportunities, either via technology or sometimes just by communicating in a different way, whether that's with teachers being able to get in contact with their pupils, or whether it's been through national programs. And you're absolutely right. What might we be able to do? For example, we've had a discussion about you know, sometimes if your child is not very well and you miss a week of education because they've had tonsillitis or what have you miss that opportunity for learning. But actually, if we are using a digital platform, if those lessons are able to be recorded, then it's something you can go back, you can revisit, you can re-access maybe later on, when that youngster's well again, or if you're not quite sure, you can go back and revisit. So how do we take some of the learning and ways of working and hold on to that? And I think actually moving into September, that I think will feature quite heavily as part of our return and how we complement that. I think when you think about some of our youngsters with special educational needs and disabilities, some of our older youngsters, there's absolutely being able to, it's felt more natural for some youngsters to be able to access their learning in their own time and in their own way. And there have been real positives. We've heard of real positive engagement in terms of that's made it more manageable for some youngsters, where, for example, travelling might be a bit of a barrier. You need to settle down into the school day once you've made the journey to school. Actually, it's maybe fitted in for some of those youngsters. So we need to make sure we capture that. And how do we arrange things maybe differently? Absolutely, one of the challenges and opportunities has been around technology. Obviously, we've been in a situation where the government has given access to devices to some of our more vulnerable youngsters. Is it enough? Does that mean every youngster has got the kit that they need to be able to access learning, independent learning in the way that we would like to? Probably not, but it's very much a step in the right direction. And what has come out of this is a conversation, very much what you were saying about digitally inclusive, whether that's about the cost of connectivity or the speed of one's broadband, or what, you know, have you got the right kit? And we've started to have a conversation with our college, with our university, with our partners about what we might be able to do to address that. This is an opportunity to be highly ambitious, I think, and think about how this could impact right from the youngest children right through to adults. For example, our adult learning offer has all been put online as well, which has been brilliant. We've seen a huge take up, but again, who is missing out, and is that related to poverty or accessibility? What might we do if we collaborate for Kirklees? And that has to be a real focus, and one I think that we did talk about with the partnership yesterday.
Thanks, Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda, any indicator to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I say starts off more as a comment, really. I don't think it's necessarily one for you to answer, Joanne, but it's just to put up a flag for the future as well, really, and it concerns the catch-up package, which last I heard from, as you rightly point out, all this wave of guidance that changes very frequently. It's not available for post-16 education. And if a post-16, 16 to 18-year-old is in a school, it may be that the school can, via part of the allocation they've got for younger pupils, to support 16 and 17-year-olds. But in Kirklees, there is a much higher number of 16 to 18-year-olds in colleges. And last I looked, it was 84% are in colleges where they haven't got that flexibility to via because they're just not going to get any catch-up funding. Now, there's nothing you can do about that. At the moment, there's nothing we can do about that other than complain as we have done. But it's just a flag, really, that Kirklees, because of its high proportion of post-16 students in colleges that are not at the moment going to get any of this catch-up funding, are going to be more disadvantaged than 16 to 18-year-olds elsewhere, potentially, because of this bizarre allocation of the catch-up funding.
Thank you, Linda. So I think that's an issue that we need to be picking up around making sure that post-16, young people in post-16 are getting the support they can do. Perhaps that's something, John, that can be followed up with our contacts with DFE.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strong point that's been made, actually. When you think about, there's been obviously, and rightly so, a large emphasis on year 10 youngsters, thinking about their year 11 year from September, but this year's year 11 are transitioning into our post-16 or into their post-16 education, be it college or otherwise. What might they have missed as a result of not being able to complete their courses? And again, I think all credit to our settings in terms of what they've done to give those youngsters a good end to their I suppose pre-16 education. It's a really strong point that's been made, and certainly we will raise it with our DFE colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Richard, had you indicated to speak again?
Yeah, please. Sorry, I got cut off earlier, so I missed quite a bit of what was going on. I had to restart my laptop, and I think my internet dropped out. So, Joanne, just briefly, and I don't want to go over old ground. I know you covered this a bit, but you talk about this gap analysis, and you talked about when kids go back to school so they can be assessed. What I was talking about was something a bit different to that. It was about there must be an understanding locally about things that have been missed within the curriculum for this year, not where kids have got to with the returnment, but about what they haven't been given in terms of setting of coursework to be done at home. That's the bit I was talking about. If you could, I don't expect you to have a long answer to this now. It's just more of a request. If you could consider this pretty quickly, because we've only got 2 weeks to do it, and this needs to be a local thing at school level. It's not something you can fix. But if the schools if it was suggested that they thought about this and just dropped a quick note out to people at home to say, look, these are the bits that you lot will have missed. No apportionment of blame. That's how it is. These are the bits that you will have missed over the summer. Perhaps you could have a look at it, and then when you get back to school in September, you've got half a chance of being somewhere like you needed to be to start with. So I don't expect an answer to that. It's just, in my opinion, that would be a good thing to do.
So we can try and pick that up, Joanne. Yeah.
And I think certainly as schools have been trying to balance the here and the now, what opportunities around summer we have, maybe what might give some reassurance again, those conversations that we've been having with our schools around summer as well, not necessarily about catch up, although some schools absolutely will be thinking about that, is going to be really, really important in terms of youngsters being school ready. So absolutely, thank you for the comment.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thanks. Cheers.
Right, thank you, Joanne. Thank you, panel members, for all your questions, and Joanne for leading on that particular item. Okay, right, we're going to move on then to item 9. We've been at it for quite a while, colleagues, hour and a quarter now, 2 really chunky bits of work we've done there. So I think if we try and be as brief as possible with our updates and our work programme for the remainder of the meeting, I think one of the things we've found about these virtual meetings, they seem to be a bit more intense than when we're meeting in a face-to-face basis. So item 9 is the update on Almonbury Community School. I think Martin will be, you're going to be leading on that for us, and then I think Councillor Munro has got a question, if you can be prepared to answer that question, Alison, at that stage. Thank you. Martin.
Thank you. I assume you can hear me now.
We can, yeah.
Good. Okay, so obviously we've shared a report. I'll just go through some brief highlights of on that, given time and so on. I think it's fair to say that we, working together with the partnership of schools, we're now in a well advanced stage of this project, if I can call it that, very much in an implementation phase. Despite the challenges that COVID has thrown in our direction, this was a priority, and we've continued to move forward with it in the best interests of the children, the pupils of Almonbury Community School. I think part of that moving into this phase is that a lot of the communication now is between the schools that the children will be moving to and the families themselves, rather than the council doing a lot of the communication. That doesn't mean to say we've stopped, but it's just a natural evolution of moving towards implementation, because it's about the individual circumstances of each of those schools and the pupils that will join them. The report covers academisation, the conversion project, and I think just to report that remains on track for a conversion on 1st of September. There are always risks with these things. This is quite normal. It may not happen on that day, but at the moment it does appear to be on track for that. And to highlight that the Academy Trust, following some engagement, have chosen to change the name of the future primary school, so it will in the future be Hillview Academy moving forwards. Uniform is worthwhile just adding a little bit to the uniform item on there. We did commit to providing support for parents, and I can report that the vouchers will go out to parents hopefully today, actually, if not today, tomorrow, and will land with parents tomorrow and the beginning of next week. Obviously, the opening of retail establishments has been a factor in the timing of that, but we've spoken to the 2 main suppliers in the local area, and they are ready and poised for parents to present those vouchers and receive free items of uniform. HR processes are now well advanced. It was something that we focused on a little bit in the last update. So I think it's fair to say that there is much greater certainty now for staff members of Almonbury Community School, and working through those processes, I can confirm that there have been no compulsory redundancies as a result of those processes. I think we've had a report go to Cabinet seeking authority to invest in schools within the area of Almonbury Community School, and in some, and as a direct result of the decisions that were taken last summer. So King James, obviously there was a huge commitment to investment there. We've already got part of the planning application in place. So this relates to the movement of modulars, and that's where a new block of classrooms will go. So it's important to get that planning application information in and through the system. And within the next few days, there'll be more of the planning process for the new block visible in the public domain. So that's quite imminent. And also just to confirm that work at the Greenside building, the primary school, is all scheduled for this summer, and we've got a high degree of confidence that will be completed on time for the benefit of those primary pupils into the future. And we've been working very closely with the incoming trust on that work. So I think that really gives a really quick summary of what's in the report, if that helps, and obviously happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for that. Just to be aware, I think Paul Davis and I are both members of the Huddersfield Planning Committee, so I think we need to be careful about any comments that we might make on that for when that comes through, but we might need discussions at a later stage, so thank you. Thank you, Martin. Alison Munro, Councillor Alison Munro, have you got
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
And then I'll bring panel members in after Alison.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin, for that report. It's good to note that there have been no compulsory redundancies, and I've noted that staff have secured roles in other schools, and some have unfortunately taken voluntary redundancy. I know a deployment process had been agreed with partner schools, and that was being shared with Almondbury Community School secondary staff before any posts were advertised. I understand, however, that there are current adverts for jobs for staff, and I know that it was difficult to recruit staff during the process of closing secondary provision at ACS. So I think it's really important that the panel should note that throughout the process, staff working at Almondbury Community School, they've been placed under enormous strain, and it will have impacted on them and their families emotionally, and they've been through an awful lot of anxiety and economic worries. And I really wonder, if they've actually, because I've noted that there are some staff vacancies, if they're actually they've become thoroughly disillusioned with education and the process that they've been forced down. So I just wondered if you could explain, why there are some staff vacancies. Please.
Okay, so it's difficult to comment precisely. I think the vacancies are in the primary phase, and part of the process did separate, part of the HR process did separate primary from secondary, because obviously of the different nature of the skills needed in primary and secondary. The process has followed has been done in close collaboration with the trade unions, and that's been a really positive sort of working relationship, I think, with the trade unions through this. It came down to choices for staff in some cases. Sometimes it's just the right time for staff to do something different, or if they're approaching, I mean, it's really difficult to sort of generalize on that. You'd have to get down to each individual member of staff, but I'm certainly not picking up on any sort of any sort of wider, concerns of the process or what this has been done. I think it's worth recognising, though, and I think I did include that in the report, our gratitude to the staff. We recognise this has been a really, really difficult process that's from the very beginning of the consultation about the future of Almondbury right through to now, where many of them are still working in school today for the benefit of those pupils. We do owe our gratitude to those staff, and I do want to recognise that. I think Joanne's popped her hand up. She obviously wants to come in on this one.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, I just want to really re-emphasise what Martin's just said about the professionalism, the dedication of Almondbury Community School staff. It's been challenge upon challenge upon challenge. There's been a statutory process. There's been a direction of travel around some significant change around schooling in the area, and they have been absolutely dedicated to the best outcomes for these youngsters. I think very much we've done an awful lot of listening. The well-being of staff has been incredibly important through this, and it's real testament to how much they care about those youngsters, and yes, there are natural vacancies in partner schools, but that support is there, and yeah, I really do want to pay tribute to those staff and the leaders in school. They've been exceptional.
Thank you. Thank you. Was that your only question, Alison?
No, I've just got a second question actually.
Okay.
It's just in relation to, I know, Martin, we've had a few meetings and ward meetings, catch-ups with you, and I know at one point you did say you happened to mention there were a couple of families who hadn't or weren't engaging with the process for the transfer of schools, and I just wondered. Obviously, I followed this process since the announcement to close secondary provision was announced, and I just wondered if managed, if those families had now connected with you and you'd got arrangements in place for those children from those two families.
I think that was resolved quite some time ago. I think my last update to the scrutiny committee said that we had a place for every single pupil, and I don't have concerns about non-engagement at the moment. I think it's something that we need to be very mindful of, though. It kind of links into what Joanne was talking about. We're in a very different situation now, aren't we, to normal, and where you've got big change, as we've had at Almondbury, we need to be very sensitive to that. But at the moment, my understanding is there is engagement. That engagement now is directly with the schools rather than with the council. But we are here to support at any point where we might be needed to, and any family that needs additional support. Yeah, that offer remains, but I think it was resolved quite some time ago.
Oh, thank you for that. I just hadn't noted that, and I just thought it's something I should perhaps just raise. But thank you very much, Martin. That's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Panel members, have we got any questions on Almondbury Community School? If you want to indicate. Right, thank you for those. I think the staffing issue, I thank you for both Martin and Joanne for your responses, particularly on the staffing issue. And I think one of the things we might want to look at, again, in terms of our look at our educational outcomes, is the impact, where this is happening in school. This situation is happening in schools in Kirklees, the impact on staff, but also that impact that the changes staff and the stresses on staff have on children's educational outcomes as well. I think that's something we do need to keep an eye on. And perhaps a conversation with the Department for Education and Regional Schools Commissioner, in light of the bet links we have at the moment, for another reason, actually saying, well, are we doing the best that we can do for the staff and students within Kirklees? But thank you for that update on the community school. Okay, going to move on to the children's work programme now. We did discuss this and revise it at February-March meeting. Obviously, a lot of change in them. I've taken the opportunity, and I don't think it's quite full. We've now got 7 key lines of inquiry during the year. I've tried to reprofile them a little bit, which hasn't fully reflected in the report. About looking at the impact on children, the number of children, and also the missing impact. And the way I've put it is, I think it was Richard Smith, your suggestion about looking at the improvement journey ought to underline everything. So we've put that at number 1. The ongoing theme about looking at educational outcomes. We obviously have a caring concern for the number of children in care. Paul Davis, you brought up about youth service and youth initiatives, and I think there's plenty of opportunity during the year to look at that and understand there's some reshaping of youth services happening during the year. An underlying theme is partnership arrangements. I've heard Joanne talking about how important partnership is, and the partnership board, learning partnership board in terms of educational outcomes and going and that partnership is so important in so many situations. We got the key piece of work on special educational needs, regular reviews on that. And the other thing, I think, probably not necessarily for a panel to look at. I mean, a lot of the data that comes to us at panel is looked at other meetings. You know, I see the same data coming through at Children's Improvement Board and Corporate Parenting Board, and we need to make sure that we're looking at the data. I mean, one of the things I've picked up during lockdown is the amount of time that the staff and the meetings that go on looking at performance information and monitoring it. I know Mel Meggs and Elaine McShane have mentioned Tableau, which understands the way of picking information out at moment by moment basis from Liquid Logic. All that's improved. It might be useful for panel members to be able to drop in and observe some of those meetings, just so we can corroborate some of the information that's coming through. So it's not necessarily information having to come back to panel for us to look at in a separate report. Just see how that information is used during the year. So the review of the improvement journey is the overarching aim, and most of our scrutiny work for the year should be looking at the Children's Improvement Plan. So I think I had 3 key things. I think there's an opportunity for more visits and observations doing that virtually. We've had quite a few during last year where we've went to Northorpe Hall, been to the youth offending team, other observations have gone on. Perhaps if we can just have an invitation to some of the virtual meetings, not for us to be asking questions, but just to see what's going on. Might be opportunities there. Opportunities to look at data, again, partnership working. I think the other thing, I think Dale, the point you kept reminding us at meetings throughout the year was about children's voice, and using children's voice, or the hearing children's voice can improve outcomes. And again, there might be opportunities during the year using virtual means to actually make sure that we're hearing more clearly the voice of children, or making sure that's been heard at the most appropriate place. So I don't know if panel members have got any comments or questions on the work programme. If you just want to indicate. Right. Sorry, who's put the hand up? Oh.
I think Dale wants to speak.
Dale, did you want to come in there?
Yes, this isn't actually about the work programme, because I don't have the schedule for the meeting in front of me, so I'm a bit behind time. We have heard from Joanne some very encouraging ways in which technical expertise has been developed and innovated. I'd like to hear from both Joanne and Elaine. Have there been any positives that have come out of the last 15 weeks? And if so, are there any that you'd like to see developed in the long term?
Right, we'll put those quick questions to Elaine and Joanne. We might not be able to follow that up fully now, Dale, but it's something they might want to feedback. Elaine, just one positive out of the last 15 weeks that we want to keep following up on.
I think actually I mentioned very early on about the children and young people's response to contributing virtually to meetings, and I think we want to enhance that, and it takes into account as well, wide-ranging needs. So when people were talking about provision of laptops and the like for children around schools, it's remembering that actually we've got some children with additional needs, and certainly when we were receiving laptops from the DFE, I had to take some decisions about different type of equipment for children in our special schools where general laptops don't meet their needs. So it is fully understanding the broad range of needs, and I think as it was Councillor Davis mentioned about access to the internet as well, making sure that our children and families are in the best place ever to use the new modern technology, and it's certainly something that we're having as a priority to think about how we get the fullest out of that.
Thank you, Elaine. Joanne, one positive that we've picked up and we're going to continue developing.
Just one. There are lots.
Well, the main one. Yeah, I know there are lots, but
I'd agree with what Elaine's just said. I think we've had strong partnerships in Kirklees. We enjoy strong partnerships. I think the creativity that's come out of our schools and our partnership working has accelerated as a result of this, whether that's between schools, between the local authority and schools and settings, but importantly, between children and their families, schools and the local authority. We've got lots of ideas about that home to school engagement is singularly with parents and carers being the principal educators of their youngsters. It's not just about consultation, it is about engagement and that voice of children and young people to shape this future with us. I think we've leapt forward. So how do we continue and build upon that? And there's many more as well, but that's one.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you. Okay, and perhaps we'll follow up those other positives over the year as we go ahead. Thank you. Panel members, any other questions on the work programme? There'll be opportunities to get stuck into that as we go over the year. Right, okay, thank you. Right, dates of our future meetings. We've had to reschedule those and reprogram those. So there'll be a Thursday afternoons starting at 2 p.m. On the 13th of August, the 1st of October and the 12th of November. We'll try and make those. We'll see if the virtual meetings are working quite well, we'll keep those as virtual, but they will be virtual in the first instance. And we'll see, there might be opportunities for to do face-to-face stuff over the time. And again, there'll be a programme of briefings going on during that time as well. And we'll try and see if we can get some of these virtual visits organised to observe some of the work and the good work that's going on. Okay. So we'll get those. I think the appointments have been sent out for dates of future meetings. Right, we've got another substantial item of business on the agenda. It's 25 to 12, so we've heard quite a lot of it. I think, Elaine, if you wanted to give us, if we can just give us a brief summary of the improvement journey, where we are now. If we try and do most of this in public, given this is an in-public meeting, and then if there's any brief questions we need to ask in private, we'll do that. We'll do that in a minute or two. But just the highlights of the improvement journey, where we are.
I will, and I'll thank you, Chair. I'll try and be succinct because there's so much about the improvement journey, because from my perspective, we're in the third year of our improvement journey. And when I say the third year, I am starting from the point where we commenced the Kirklees Leeds partnership and not looking prior to that. And so interestingly, through the improvement board, what we've been to look at, it's been 12 months actually since we had our Ofsted inspection. So we've continued to really work towards improvements over that time. We've kept our improvement plan simple, but actually been really ambitious about what we've been wanting to achieve. So what we're doing with the improvement board currently is working towards having our improvement notice lifted. And to do that, we have, and these documents are not public as yet because they're going to the Secretary of State. We're providing evidence against the 6 tests that we were set. And the 6 tests agreed were a well-functioning corporate service, stable leadership, continued improvement in the quality and effectiveness of practice, strong and supportive partnerships, a compelling strategy for the workforce, and effective performance information and quality assurance. So some real sizable pieces of work that we have to demonstrate. Alongside that, we've also provided evidence against the 10 Ofsted recommendations. So a raft of information has gone to the Department for Education, and what we will be having next week actually are some focus groups that will include practitioners, managers and leaders, and the leaders will include the chief exec and the lead member for children. And what will happen following that is the independent chair of the improvement board, with Steve Walker, will pull together a report with the DFE that will be considered by the Secretary of State. So we do see that our next step is the improvement notice being lifted, and I think it's being recognised by partners and everyone that actually there has been good progress made And I think what we'll be able to do going forward is share that evidence and that learning, but also talk about what we've done in our improvement plan is add the improvement elements, but also what we describe as business as usual and the improvements that we want to make there. So I think in the future scrutiny, we'll be able to share those reports and actually explore the work of scrutiny and how they fit into challenging some of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Could you just report back to panel? There was a really positive, Elaine did a really positive presentation to the Children's Improvement Board. That was received very well. So things from that, and that's a bit of scrutiny has been going on outside this work. So I was impressed by what I observed and what I heard, and the positive questions have been asked by members of the Children's Improvement Board. Are there any sort of brief questions we want to ask Elaine at this stage of the meeting? Linda.
Linda's on mute.
Linda, do you want to unmute? Sorry,
my turn. Yeah, I thought it was a really comprehensive report and very honest and very thorough, and it certainly gave me as a lay reader a really high level of assurance that you were across
Linda,
it.
Just to be careful about discussing contents of the, if you keep the comments general, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to
talk about detail because it was really quite a short question on the back of that, really, which is, and I don't know if it's implied in what you said about trying to get the improvement notice lifted, but my question was going to be, if Ofsted came in tomorrow, what do you think they would assess us as now? Does that mean that you think it would now be good?
I'm aiming towards outstanding, Linda. Truth be known, and that's what I talk about ambitious. Yeah. But you can never second guess what experience you have of Ofsted on a day. And so one of the things I talked about last time is actually, there requires improvement to be good, and they talked about that in a leadership term. And for me as a leader, that was really. I didn't receive that as well as I might have, but so really taking note of what Ofsted said, because actually they're coming to measure. This is about children and young people. So we, as much as actually we would have wanted good last time, we accept what they say, we unpick that, we put that back in our improvement plan, and we work continuously, not in isolation, because I think what we would say is the difference, and I think what you would see in the improvement board is that partners, and I'm not saying we get everything right every time, but I think what partners say is actually we are outward facing, we are open and transparent. If I'm asked questions about things, I will explore them and come back with an honest, frank answer. We're not hiding away, we're not shying away from some of the challenges. And what I would say during COVID, actually this period, our social workers have actually gone, like many other practitioners, have gone well beyond what you would expect of them on a day, and actually the centre of that is our children and young people, because that's what we're focusing on. But coming back to, we don't always get it right. That goes back to our very early conversation in this meeting.
Thank you, Elaine. Right. So I think what I'm going to do now is, so that we can discuss some of the detail of the report, we're going to move into private session. So I need to move item 13. So I want us to resolve under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972 that the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting during consideration of the following item of business on the grounds that it might involve items likely to be exempt information as divided under part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Act. So can I move that? So panel members, can we approve moving into private session? Just indicate by visually. That's fine, thank you. So I can just thank everybody who's been following us on live stream for attending this meeting. That's really appreciated. Our next live stream meeting will be on Thursday, the 13th of August 2020 at 2 p.m, and we look forward to seeing people then. So we're just going to move now into private session.